Yeah, this is a record from the Idaho Department. I mean, from the State Insurance Fund. Uh, this is part of the record from Dr. Holt, which Dr. Holt is the one that I went to see in regards to my private health records. The Idaho State Insurance Fund is trying to make everyone to believe that I seen Dr. Wilson before I seen Dr. Holt, and that Dr. Holt is occurring with Dr. Wilson's findings of my 5% of a whole person. But in regards, this document that you are looking at is actually Dr. Holt's record, and what it is on page 7 of Dr. Holt's letter to the State Insurance Fund on October of 2008. And this is one of his pages, and this is what they what he was stating is that I'm trying to make it so you guys can all read it too while I do this. Okay, I asked him if well, let me just get down here. He states he does not have diabetes and is not on medication for it. While I was incarcerated at the Idaho Department of Correction, they were trying to say that I had diabetes and they wanted to give me some medication, but I told them I didn't have diabetes, so I had a second opinion done. And that second opinion came out to be that I did not have diabetes. And meanwhile, what you have to do is you have to put in another request to medical because they want you to have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich on the weekends. I didn't request it. They're the ones that told me to go get it. But Dr. Holt is making it sound otherwise. Mr. Clark did not want to discuss his prior medical history, and he asked why I knew so much about him. I told him that I received a significant amount of records, including those from the Idaho Department of Correction. Mr. Clark told me that he was an angry person when he was at the penitentiary, and he did not want to talk about that anymore. Well, that is because the Idaho State Insurance Fund at this moment was telling the Industrial Commission that without Mr. Clark's signature, they are unable to get these records from the Idaho Department of Correction, but in fact had already received these records and sent them to this doctor, Dr. Holt. And then what he put in his statements are unfounded. Because you see, when he started asking me some questions, he came across gout. Now, there was only one place that I've ever been referred to as gout, and that was, again, while I was incarcerated at the Idaho Department of Correction. And I guess gout is from, well, my foot was swelling for some reason. Now, so when he asked me about that, I did ask him, where'd you get these records? Because I'm arguing with the Industrial Commission right now that State Insurance Fund, I believe, should not get some of these records because they weren't relevant to the injury of my arm. And this is also what he stated down below underneath the circle. I want to talk with Mr. Clark about his alleged violent mistreatment by his father, since a medical report from the Idaho State Penitentiary on December 7th of 2001 that stated that Mr. Clark had cerebral trauma as a child because his father was violent. Now, what the hell did that have to do with my injury? That's because they received these documents fraudulently and wouldn't allow me to argue before the commission what was relevant and not relevant prior to them sending these medical records to a Dr. Holt for review to determine what I'm entitled to. So basically, this is a biased report, which was done prior to Dr. Wilson. But as the Supreme Court also states, how it was Dr. Wilson that Dr. Holt was agreeing with. But you see, it wasn't, because I didn't see Dr. Wilson until 2010, during my attorney era. And I seen Dr. Holt in 2008 while I was on my own. Another question, I really don't want to state this, but I'm going to have to put it out there. Why would he mention something like this when I didn't even know it was in my records? Because I didn't tell him this. Another question I wish to ask him was that Another question I wish to ask him was that he stated he did not want to talk about his past. Well, of course not. Because it had nothing to do, because I was fighting with the Industrial Commission that I believed that those records were not relevant. And before I had an attorney and before I said anything, I felt obligated not to say nothing to Dr. Holt. Okay, here it is. About his past. A possible suicide attempt as a teenager. Why is that out in the open? And again, I wasn't aware that I attempted suicide as a teenager. Mr. Holt, State Insurance Fund, back that statement up. He was allegedly sexually abused as a child. Now, where the hell is that in the records? I don't remember being sexually abused as a child. These are psychiatrist records. That is protected under a HIPAA law. And these were an intake mental health history screening at the Idaho Department of Correction. Psychiatrist Dr. Clint and Dr. Kent. It was described that he is depressed and has a sense of tremendous need about him. Subsequently, when Mr. Clark was incarcerated in 1998, he was extremely depressed, anxious, and agitated about being released from prison and whether or not he could make it on the outside. That's a lie, Mr. Holt. Back that statement up. Okay. Another record stated that he had several anger problems in the past before going to prison. Well, where'd you get that information from, Mr. Holt? But again, the Idaho Supreme Court would not allow me, or the Industrial Commission was keeping this, because you see, the Supreme Court only did a standard review, only what the commission wanted to send them. So they probably didn't see this part. The Idaho Department of Correction medical records indicate that Mr. Clark had dependency needs because of his underlying psychiatric emotional problems. Mr. Clark put in a request to see a medical psychiatrist for numerous physical complaints. He wished to have altered food or diets. Well, there's that. You see, when the doctors at the prison thought that I had diabetes, well, you have to put in a kite after that appointment for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, which is what they want you to do because they don't want to be held liable for nothing. So, I didn't ask for that. I was told that I had to do that. He wanted talk therapy. What talk therapy? Jesus. And what is seen at the prison would be special privileges, such as lower bunk. Well, if you review the records that they got fraudulently also from Holy Rosary Hospital prior to going to prison, I had a back problem and also an injury due to a robbery that almost broke my back in 98. So, in December 23rd of 1988. Now, I even had limitations, but I still worked. And just prior to going to prison, I had messed my back up from lifting a cast iron sink, which is also documented. So was I asking for privileges to have a lower bunk, or for me to be jumping up and down off a higher bunk? That wasn't very good for my back. So was that special privileges? That was a medical issue is why I requested that. And I had documents to back up my medical. But Dr. Holt, in his writing, is making it sound like I had tremendous needs. I needed this, and I demanded that. And what is seen at the prison as special privileges, such as lower bunk, not to have to wait in line. Well, that's where that diet comes in again. I guess when you're diet, you automatically get to go to the front of the line. I didn't request that. It was described by the prison. Marching, etc. Well, what's your etc.? Those records described his manipulating others for secondary gain. Really? Is that right, Mr. Holt? But then again, the Industrial Commission allowed this to stay and wouldn't allow me to go before them to have this squashed from my records because it was not relevant. Mr. Clark stopped me from asking questions about his past. You bet. And told me that he wanted to limit the evaluation to the problems with his arm. But he did discuss other pressing needs and problems he has since he was facing incarceration again. He told me that on August 22nd of 2008, that he was arrested at Lifeways in Ontario, Oregon, where I do my counseling and my psychiatry help based upon my injury and the PTSD. And I was arrested and put down at gunpoint, which is also recorded at Lifeways report. And I was taken to jail, and I was in jail for a couple of weeks, and then I was out. And I also told him how I had my doctors. Well, he didn't get to hear it all. But what it was is that I went ahead and took it to a jury trial. I had all of my physicians testify. I had Dr. Hansen, Jay Winkham, my physical therapist, and Dr. Hansen all testify at my hearing because I blacked out doing 96 miles an hour through the middle of Ontario, Oregon to Lifeways, and I don't remember it. The only thing I remembered was waking up the next day in jail. But I did take it to a jury trial, and I was found not guilty of eluding a police officer based upon that I had been cut off of the medication that I was needing, and I snapped. But again, in the records, they're trying to make it out like something totally different. They don't even talk about how I took it to a jury trial, how I was found not guilty, and how it was related to my injury. No, they're not doing that. But by September 4th, 2013, because the Supreme Court agreed with the decision of the commission. Well, I have some issues on that I'm about to ready to post, because before I go over there, I want to make sure that I have things on video that can be used down the road if anything happens to me. So again, these are statements that are published that should not be published. But the Supreme Court says otherwise. I didn't give them permission to have my records to send to this guy. Nor did they have somebody else's permission. So, again, there is corruption in Idaho. And in local government. You have an Idaho State Insurance Fund who commits fraud. You have an Idaho State Industrial Commission that uses their abuse of authority and allow the State Insurance Fund to get away with the fraud and the misuse of my private health records. without any kind of justification, but wants to sanction me $300, but they did sanction me $300 in their findings of facts and conclusions of law because they wanted me to sign these medical release forms so I can cover up their fraud before I found out. But in fact, I found out before I signed those because I wasn't even aware they had them when I went to Dr. Holt. You see, so I'll see you guys soon because I will stand up for myself. Because if nobody stands up for me, if I don't stand up for myself, nobody's going to do it for me. Have a good day.